Welcome to Noon Wednesday. I'm Marissa Wojcik, multimedia journalist with Here and Now on PBS Wisconsin. Today is June 9. After a year of protests demanding reforms in policing practices and standards, where does Wisconsin's largest police department in Milwaukee stand on working toward meaningful reform? And how does it compare to peer cities across the country? A comprehensive report recently released examined these questions very closely. One of the report's authors and the president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, Rob Henkin, joins us to explain more. And Rob, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, Milwaukee's Mayor Tom Barrett requested this analysis from you specifically. What was the purpose behind this request? And particularly, the city established this collaborative community committee in 2017, and it made its own recommendations.
So clearly, Marissa, police reform is not a new topic for the city of Milwaukee. It precedes the protests last summer and the George Floyd incident, and there have been efforts ongoing for several years. That said, in the wake of the protests shortly thereafter, the mayor decided to bring together a very broad group of community stakeholders, including advocates and activists, including the Milwaukee Police Department and Fire and Police Commission leadership themselves, to just launch a discussion about where Milwaukee needs to go next. And I think at that first meeting, there was a decision that really the group could benefit from just common understanding about where we stood today. And in particular, with police reform efforts bubbling up nationally, with proposals flying in from all over the place, the specific task that we thought we could do that would really add some value to those deliberations was to establish, when it comes to the key areas of reform, where did the Milwaukee Police Department stand with regard to its policies and protocols? And then we added one additional layer of analysis that looked at 5 peer cities and went a little deeper into how Milwaukee compared to those. Now, the final thing I'll say before you get to your next question is, this was really a moving target. We started this analysis late last fall. It continued until just a few weeks ago. And there were points in time where we had done our analysis, we had written it up, and we had to go and rewrite it because then something happened in terms of changes that were actually adopted by the Fire Police Commission or the Milwaukee Police Department.
And we will get into those moving targets, as you call them. And your report had 6 main areas of focus: reimagining public safety, use of force, data collection, accountability, training, and demilitarization. So of those, what stood out to you the most after digging into them and examining reform proposals in these areas? And where does Milwaukee's progress stand?
Yep. Well, so in terms of standing out with regard to your last point and progress, use of force. And it's interesting because had we released this report in early December of last year, our conclusion would have been diametrically different from what it ended up. That is because in December of 2020, the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission, working closely to their credit with Milwaukee Police Department, did adopt a series of use of force reforms that essentially put Milwaukee right in line with the national calls in that area. And again, this is somewhat subjective. Just because somebody issues a call for a use of force reform, how does that bubble up to the level where we would say, oh, good, you've met that litmus test? We looked across a range of different groups, including police organizations and advocacy groups. But one in particular is something called the 8 Can't Wait campaign. In the wake of the Floyd incident, they came out with a series of use of force proposals. Police departments across the country really looked at those seriously, and city governments across the country. And so when you hold up what Milwaukee did in December of 2020 with regard to use of force, how officers are authorized and actually can utilize force in different types of situations and what types of force they can use. City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee Police Department are now very much in line with the 8 Can't Wait recommendation. So that that's a serious area of progress. On the other hand, I think one of the real interesting from a policy wonk perspective part of this whole conversation is under this category of reimagining police and or reimagining public safety. And there's a range of reimagining reform efforts going on. One is the effort to defund police, which is obviously very contentious. But a lot of this speaks to how do you use law enforcement and which types of 911 calls and other incidents do you want law enforcement to be the responder versus trained clinicians in behavioral health versus emergency medical services versus just civilians when it's a traffic incident. And so there's a lot of area there that really we've just started to think about in Milwaukee. So I think that's one where potentially more progress can be made.
And you specifically talk about in your report that your analysis didn't include, a grade or how well the department is doing, on the individual level of how their officers are maybe implementing these changes. Does that make a difference in how these things play out? Because a lot of times things can be subjective in terms of what would a reasonable officer do, and is it difficult to actually measure the changes or progress or backslides that are being made in police reform?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought up that point, because it was a point of concern for us in even doing this research and releasing this report. Very clearly, what we are looking at is what Milwaukee Police Department policies and protocols say on paper. So that's something that a policy researcher can do. We can go and see whether the spirit and letter of the written word when it comes to policies and protocols on this range of different types of issues, whether those are or are not consistent with some of these national calls for reform and with the way other cities have constructed their policies and protocols. What we definitively cannot do or could not do in this case as policy researchers was to try to evaluate how those policies and protocols, number one, are being implemented out on the street by police officers. Now, there are other mechanisms that can be used, citizen complaints. So that's a critical area that we didn't get into in this report. And the second one is, to what extent is the leadership of the police department actively promoting the seriousness of the policies and protocols and enforcing them? And there too, we're speaking to what they say. We're not speaking to the way MPD leadership is essentially advocating for them to the frontline police officers, as well as just how those officers are carrying them out on the street. So it's very important that while the messaging that we have been delivering here is pretty positive in terms of the progress that has been made on paper, we cannot comment as to how these policies are being carried out.
Now, continuing that, how does then both data collection and the accountability piece come in? Accountability does kind of sound like evaluation of how well these protocols and procedures are being implemented. And do we know reports of how much no-knock warrants are being used, of different utilizations of use of force, of chokeholds? Do we have an idea of how that reporting is going?
So we did have one of our buckets in terms of police reform was the heading of accountability and transparency. And essentially what that spoke to is the department doing what ostensibly it ought to be doing in terms of, number one, monitoring and collecting data and information that is actually documenting police performance. Police performance not only for the sake of policing practice, but in terms of following the department's policies and protocols. And to what extent then are they synthesizing that data sharing it, and really even presenting it to the community, to the general public, to the news media in a way that is going to ensure that people are aware of how they're doing. And so that's where we looked at the issue. Again, we're not looking at whether Officer X, when he or she did something that was against the protocol, whether the department was taking action on that. But we again looked at what are the department's policies with regard to data collection and synthesis and transparency. Essentially, we found a mixed bag for the Milwaukee Police Department. But again, just in the 6 months that we were researching this, we saw some progress. In one case where MPD now needs to report on its stop and frisk incidents, for example, I have no idea whether they would have done that on their own, but they actually, there was a reporting provision included in a legal settlement with the ACLU here, so that they are now reporting on that. So for the most part, there's pretty good accountability in terms of data gathering and reporting. Where we found some areas of improvement is in taking that data and using it to actually try to convey to the public how the police department is doing. I will say to you that while in our report we cited some areas where progress could be made, we found great receptivity by the Milwaukee Police Department to say, yeah, I mean, we don't want to hide anything. If we're collecting the data, we want to be able to put it out there in a way that people are going to have appropriate access and that it's going to be relatively user-friendly.
Is it surprising that this data collection has been lacking or was lacking? And is there accountability in terms of accurate reporting? And if a police officer does have misconduct, that another officer or another area of the department can step in and not receive any sort of retaliation?
So two good questions. I'll take them one at a time. Is it surprising? No. I mean, I think you look across all local government functions, and I think you will find, for not unanimously, but for the most part, among many of them, data collection and reporting is a huge challenge as local governments across the state have become increasingly challenged for a variety of factors. And I know that's not the topic of today's show. I'd be happy to come back and speak for a half hour on that one. But as these financial challenges have intensified, the direct service provision is what you fight tooth and nail to keep, but the sort of extras of having analysts and data collectors and IT people and data visualization professionals, that's the type of capacity that many local governments don't have and that many departments within local governments don't have. So to the extent that the Milwaukee Police Department could make improvement in that area, I can't tell you, but my sense is that it's not necessarily a question of will. Part of it is a question of, do they have the staff resources and capacity and expertise to do this and to do it well? So that's the answer to your first question. In terms of this question about whistleblowing and the extent to which that we're finding that fellow officers, that the blue wall does or doesn't exist when it comes to the Milwaukee Police Department and our officers who are seeing things that shouldn't be happening to the extent that they are reporting those, and are there proper channels? My humble opinion is that that's, I think, one of the top 2 or 3 areas of increased focus in the wake of the George Floyd incident that is now receiving the most attention and the attention that it does deserve. And again, I cannot speak to will, and I cannot speak to, has this been a problem of officers not wanting to rat on fellow officers? But I do think that many departments across the country didn't have the proper policies and protocols and weren't, and even to the extent that they did, were not necessarily properly enforcing them to send the message that this has to happen. So I think that is where out of the Floyd incident, and so much of the emphasis, of course, was on the chokehold issue. But the fact that there were, a group of officers there observing this, I think is something that also captured people's attention in a good way and is leading to some meaningful reform discussion.
Now, you've touched on public perception and how there's what we're kind of seeing and hearing both in media and in social media versus kind of some of these nitty gritty things that aren't as easy to follow along with because there are so many details. But specifically, this report didn't rely heavily on proposals from the advocates or activists, and some of which they called for. You mentioned defunding, but even abolishing police departments, putting that money towards other services. Why was that not necessarily considered in that lens with this report? And are those just too radical? Are they just not even really on the table in a practical way?
So under the bucket of reimagining public safety, we did take a look at this defunding police issue. The reason that there's not a lot of text in the report on that issue is really because that's an area where not much has happened yet. Number one. Number two, I think we are still struggling as a community in Milwaukee, as a state of Wisconsin, and nationally to really try to define what defunding police means. On its most basic level, of course, it means, taking and diverting some amount of police department resources and taking those away from the police department and reinvesting them in other areas that arguably might have a better impact on reducing crime. So areas like anti-poverty measures, areas like behavioral health crisis response, and so forth. And so, but as you said, I mean, this can extend to, much larger defunding. I mean, huge cuts in police sworn strength levels, or in some cases, as you mentioned, abolishing police departments and coming up with a new and different law enforcement service model. So there's been a lot of discussion. We relied most heavily on reports that had already been issued. And so as of midsummer. So again, there has been more work done on that since then, but we just didn't have access to it. But for the most part, on the defunding question in Milwaukee, at least, it's interesting. So on the one hand, the Milwaukee Police Department, its sworn strength did shrink by 120 officers as a result of the 2021 budget, out of a force of about 1,800. So certainly not an insignificant cut in police officers. The problem is, from a defunding standpoint, is that the savings that were generated from making those cuts all had to be poured right back into the police department to sustain the compensation levels and account for increases in pension and healthcare and salary costs for those officers who remained on the force. So while there was a reduction in police sworn strength, which some think is a good thing regardless of dollar savings, others think is the last thing you would want to do, but the savings that were generated from that had to stay with the police department just to keep things where they were after the loss of the 120 positions. So it did not, for the most part, free up monies to reinvest. During the city's budget debate last fall, there was some discussion about some reinvestment initiatives. An extra $300,000, for example, was put into crisis response teams. But for the most part, the city was facing such stark financial challenges overall that conversation, as badly as people wanted to have it, it really didn't materialize.
You just mentioned the crisis response teams, and it does get detailed a bit in your report. So MPD officers receive only 40 hours of crisis intervention training, which I was pretty surprised to read that figure. You said there are some that do receive more specialized training, but again, there's just a lack of funding for this. But this has also been a huge emphasis, as a lot of calls don't necessarily need an armed presence in order to respond. Is there any movement on rethinking emergency responses to these situations?
So we found that that's one of the foremost areas that discussions need to intensify to generate further progress in that area. So mind you, there's already some real good examples of crisis response ingenuity in Milwaukee that many people are even unaware of. Milwaukee County does behavioral health services for the city of Milwaukee and the other municipalities in Milwaukee County. The Milwaukee County Behavioral Health Division has been running mobile crisis teams for several years. These are teams of trained clinicians who are mobile, as the term suggests. And when incidents occur in the community for folks in mental health crisis, there's an opportunity to send these teams of clinicians to try to handle the issue as opposed to calling law enforcement. The problem is that those mobile crisis teams aren't well coordinated with, they're not dispatched by the 911 system, and they're not coordinated directly with Milwaukee Police Department response. At the same time, where BHD and the Milwaukee Police Department have teamed up is on some very specific crisis assessment response teams. They're called CART. They're teams that involve both a trained police officer and a trained clinician. And so there are 3 teams operating in the city of Milwaukee. They are able to handle a subset of the calls that come in to dispatchers that suggest that it is a behavioral health crisis issue, but they're not 24/7 and they can only respond to a subset. So those are clearly areas that could and should be built upon. And another important point that we make in this report is both the county and the city mean well in this regard, but both still tend to operate in silos and don't necessarily effectively coordinate how they're going to tackle the issue. So we have the Milwaukee Common Council that has actually formed a special task force to look at how to divert certain calls away from MPD and to other more appropriate responders. But and they talk very specifically about looking to do that in the mental health crisis area, but the city of Milwaukee doesn't do behavioral health. And so, yeah, the county has a seat in the task force, but that hasn't been a county initiative. At the same time, the county has looked at various ways that it can expand its activities and hasn't necessarily brought MPD to the table. So that is clearly an area for enhanced coordination.
Now, you chose specific cities that are comparable to Milwaukee to compare to, and I'm sure it's difficult because no city is apples to apples. There's also state law, local laws that are just so intricately different and interplay differently. But of the cities that you did compare Milwaukee to, how did Milwaukee stack up? What stood out to you?
Milwaukee stacked up pretty well. I think there was a lot of comparability among the cities. We looked at Minneapolis, Baltimore, Kansas City, Tucson. One area that stood out was in the review of critical incidents. We found that I believe each of the cities that we looked at had some substantial civilian participation in terms of the committees or groups of individuals that were charged with reviewing certain incidents, critical incidents, whereas in the city of Milwaukee for MPD, there are internal committees consisting of MPD personnel, but there is not civilian participation on those committees. And so we brought this to the Milwaukee Police Department's attention, and I think they are now seriously looking at how to try to provide for some civilian involvement to ensure that these critical incidents are reviewed not only by members of the department itself, but also external members. So I think that's an area where that we pointed out. Whistleblower protection is another area where, when looking at these other cities, we saw much more specific language in their policies and protocols outlining the specific protections that whistleblowers would receive. In Milwaukee, there is verbiage in the policies and protocols saying that whistleblowers will be protected, but really not as much detail. So that's another one where it's noted in our report. We brought it to the attention of the leadership of the Milwaukee Police Department. And as we speak, they are considering ways to strengthen those policies and procedures, and actually hope to have a revised policy before the Fire and Police Commission in the not too distant future.
Now, not only of these cities that you closely examined, but of any cities across the country, have we seen a real substantial reform put in place, such as drastic defunding, as an example? And do we know the outcome? Because it seems like there's hesitation to take a big step into the water when the consequence could be public safety is sacrificed.
Yeah, so again, this one has received so much attention and has become very political and ideological, and that's not surprising. I think the most interesting one to look at, of course, is Minneapolis, where the Floyd incident occurred. And as your viewers may be aware, there was a lot of talk in the weeks after that incident about doing some real radical reform, including potentially abolishing the police department. It turned out that there was a diversion of about $8 million from the Minneapolis Police Department budget to other areas, anti-poverty, crisis, et cetera. $8 million sounds like a lot of money, but it was really just a fraction of what many reformers were proposing in the immediate wake of the Floyd incident. And as a percentage of the police budget, and I don't have that number off the top of my head, but my guess is it's a police budget of at least $200 million. And so, a cut, but certainly not a huge cut. So the other departments we looked at, again, lots of discussion. I think more, potentially some food for thought from Milwaukee, some very specific stakeholder task forces formed to specifically analyze that issue in some of the other cities, which we have not done here yet. But in terms of action in the 2021 budget process, we did not see that there were any material steps being taken. I think another just factor that has come into play here is that suddenly local governments have access to American Relief Plan dollars. One of the immediate points that we made last summer when there were calls to defund the Milwaukee Police Department was, look, this isn't even a matter of ideology. Given what the city's budget situation is looking like, there's probably not going to be much other choice than to significantly cut the Milwaukee Police Department budget. Well, as it turned out, the revenue hits were not as great, thank goodness, as lots of us had anticipated. And the availability of these federal relief dollars, both in 2020 and now the latest package that was just adopted in March, means that from a budgetary perspective, at least, there is not as much of an impetus to cut police budget. So I think this is now going to transfer back to the ideological and what's the best way to invest in public safety set of issues as opposed to the fiscal necessity issues.
Now, speaking of the moving target issue, your analysis by and large wrapped up around April, and even since then there has still been movement on law and legislation proposals on reforms, some of which include 18 recommendations from the Speaker's Task Force on Racial Disparities, a bipartisan-led group, which was formed after Jacob Blake was shot by a Kenosha police officer. Those recommendations are now being crafted into legislation and being discussed and debated in the Capitol. Additionally, Milwaukee Representative David Bowen just last week, along with other Democrats, released their own proposals for reform, dubbing them Enough is Enough, saying that the recommendations from the task force don't go far enough. How do these proposals compare to some of the analysis that you found in your report?
So I'll be the first to admit that, we have not thoroughly analyzed all of those proposals. But I can speak in general terms. So in terms of that speaker's task force, and then out of those, I think 18 recommendations came, I believe it was 7 specific legislative proposals. And again, while we have not done this analysis, it's very important to distinguish between statewide and City of Milwaukee. And I know that City of Milwaukee folks that I talked to felt like those 7 bills really wouldn't impact Milwaukee very much because they were already in line with those requirements, that those would have a much greater impact on other police departments across the state. And I think the more recent set that were put out by Representative Bowen and others, again, I think some of those would certainly move the needle on MPD, but I think there are others of those that also would be more relevant to other police departments.
So one of the pieces of research that you included in your analysis for your report was from 2015, following Michael Brown's death. The Black Lives Matter movement began before George Floyd was murdered, and Milwaukee and other places have been the subject of police reform debates for years, as you have already mentioned. So why can't the needle move on some of these things? What will it take to see meaningful reform? Is it because meaningful reform means different things for different people?
Well, so first of all, I would say that, again, our assessment is that meaningful reform has happened in Milwaukee and is in the process of happening. And that's a very subjective statement. I mean, how do you define meaningful? So I don't think there's any question that there are folks in the community who believe that, we've maybe taken the ball from our 20-yard line to our 40, and there's still a long way to go to the end zone. Others think we've done a lot, but I think it's safe to say that action has been taken. Again, this is a topic for Milwaukee. This predated Floyd, it predated Brown. We had the Dontre Hamilton incident really shined a spotlight on this issue of how are we responding to people in crisis, and why our untrained law enforcement folks, responding to these calls. And that did precipitate the creation of these CART teams and these mobile crisis response teams and so on. But I think it's, reaching consensus on an issue like this, particularly in today's supercharged partisan political world, is just that much more difficult. And we see what has happened with the defunding issue. And again, as I've said, I think part of the problem is that defunding police means different things to different people. And to me, as you look at the spectrum of defunding, maybe reasonable people could agree on certain very important elements of that. And maybe they're not going to agree on others, but we don't even try to get to that point. We just like to fight with each other. I think there have been real efforts made in Milwaukee to bring in community stakeholders. Some of it was required by legal settlements and other things. But regardless of motivation, we have had collaborative stakeholders groups that have been working on these issues, that have been engaged with the mayor's office, that have been engaged with the Common Council, and that's what it's going to take. And it has to involve police department representatives as well. And I think that's really something we have seen over the past several months, is that there appears to be a willingness to listen to the community. Now, again, whether that willingness to listen actually means that we continue to move the ball forward in terms of critical review of our policies and protocols, and perhaps even more important, that we continue to move forward on how these are being enforced. That's still admittedly a question mark, but the beginnings of really seeing a community-driven effort, at least in Milwaukee, we do see some evidence that that's beginning to occur.
All right, well, we need to leave it there. I'm sure we could continue this discussion all day, all week, all year, and I'm sure we will be touching base with you again in the future. Rob Henkin of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
For more from Here and Now and PBS Wisconsin, you can visit pbswisconsin.org. And thank you so much for joining us on Noon Wednesday.